All right, we are here on Cliff Coast. Going to be doing a little P-40ing, and I'll discuss a little bit of facts about the P-40 while we're doing this. It's going to be what the channel is going to be. It's going to evolve into. I'm going to be giving you guys some historical facts and a little bit of background on the planes. Oh, good Lord. While we're flying them. It's a lot of high altitude, so we're going to go back this way. P-40 first flew in 1938. It was intended to be a ground attack plane and a fighter, so I guess kind of today's definition of a fighter bomber was what this plane was intended to be. It was designed and built by Curtiss, who had previously designed the P-36, which is also in our deck today. Dive on this DO-17. The P-40 was a very good fighter for its time. Unfortunately, for a lot of the rapid developments during that period of time, it became, I won't say obsolete, but it became, I guess, out of its league. You know, a lot of the Spitfire around that time as well. You had Hurricanes, BF-109s, and this, while it's a good plane, isn't in the performance league of those. In North Africa, though, this plane outperformed the BF-109 at low altitude and really did some damage. German engines have issues with overheating. The German engines in the BF-109 had engines with overheating at lower altitudes, so they couldn't really perform as well as they would at altitude. And this was definitely not an altitude fighter. This was better at lower altitudes. As you can see, it's, open this up. As you can see here, it's 12,000 feet max performance. So definitely not a altitude fighter in the sense of that word. Not going to be escorting bombers at high altitudes or anything like that. So it was definitely more suited to lower altitude, and I think that that was part of its ground strike capabilities. It was kind of suited to that because it had the better performance at lower altitudes than a lot of other fighters did. So it kind of fit that role more than a lot of fighters at the time. But this was, at the start of the war, the top-line American fighter for the Army, U.S. Army Air Corps. It was not the Air Force during World War II. The Air Force came in after the war. It was U.S. Army Air Corps, so everything was still under Army control at the time. Same branch. So that's why you see, on this one it doesn't have it, but you see on most of the P-40 skins of the era it says U.S. Army under the wings. That was the Army Air Corps, not the U.S. Air Force. Common misconception of the time is that everything was U.S. Air Force, but it wasn't. It was the U.S. Army Air Forces. We'll continue talking about this a little bit. This was the third most produced American fighter of the war, behind the 51 and the 47. We'll go over here, see if we can knock out this guy that's trying to take out our ships. Maybe get a little in on this Hurricane over here as well. But served up until the entirety of the war. Did a good job in the Aleutians. It was very well used too because we were tied up with other matters at the time, so I guess kind of the second line of weaponry got to them. The P-39 and the Super Cobra, those planes were used out there a lot. This really came to prominence with obviously the American Volunteer Group in China, the Flying Tigers. They did quite a bit of damage with this plane. Japanese really hadn't. I mean, the Chinese didn't have the type of aircraft to be defending Japanese bomber raids, so they ended up paying these guys in the American Volunteer Group, headed by Claire Chennault, to defend their country from Japanese bombers, which they did quite well. There were most of them were experienced U.S. aviators, or from other. I think there were a few from other countries as well, but mostly Americans. And they figured out how to properly tactically use the P-40, and they did so. They knew that they could not outturn the Zero, so they would fly in pairs. Fly in pairs so that the Japanese planes did not have a chance to get them one-on-one. This was also used, I won't say later on in the war, but shortly after in the war with the F-4F, what was called the Thatch Weave. It's the same type of theory behind it. You'd fly in groups. One person would engage the fighter, whatever it was, Zero or other Japanese type. Primarily Zero, that tactic was used on. And then, while the one was engaging, the other would be flying basically circles around them. So they'd go back and forth, weaving on the tail of the fighter, so that the fighter couldn't get a good shot on either one, and that they'd have good shots on the Japanese fighter. And do a little climb here. Looks like our teammates have given up on this Typhoon. I don't know why. They're on the... I guess I'm on my own here. Corsair got him finally. As you can see, we're doing quite the damage here. This plane is really good at lower tier. Within its own battle rating, this plane is definitely a world beater. Got 4 kills and 3 assists. We're going to go back to base and land here. We've got some fluid leakage. The total number of these built was 13,738. They had a production facility in Buffalo, New York, and that's where they built the entirety of them. This plane, specifically, there are different models of the P-40, but the one that's in here is the Kitty Hawk. That was the, I guess, most famous one. So, Kitty Hawk was the P-40D. They had P-40B, C, and D. Tomahawk was the name that the British and the Soviets used for this as well, but the Americans were the Kitty Hawk. It saw most of its service with the RAF in the desert campaigns. That's where the shark mouth you see on here actually came into kind of prominence, and then the Flying Tigers obviously had that going on as well. Like I said, the BF-109 was definitely outmatched by this at lower altitudes in the desert. And obviously the Allies in the desert did a good job. They cleaned them out. Germans had to retreat back to Germany and then to Italy as well. We invaded Italy shortly thereafter when we captured that. This was a low-cost airplane to build as well, so that was a huge factor at the time, because at that time the war was very much in doubt. I mean, it was not a done deal that we were going to win and Japan and Germany were going to be defeated. At that time, Germany was still very strong. Japan was still very strong and had a lot going on in the Pacific, as well as in China and Burma in that area. Just let us sit here on the airfield for a minute. Or repair. Shouldn't be too long though. 8 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds. At the time when this prototype came in, it's a very fast aircraft. 315 miles an hour at that time was very good for a fighter. This is actually faster than a lot of its counterparts. Even at the time, this could pretty much outrun the Zero. See, the max speed on this one is 367, and the Zero was usually in the 350s. So if it was in a dogfight, it could definitely outrun the Zero. Turning, like I said, wasn't really going to happen with this, though. And the Zero definitely could outturn this plane. Roll rate's pretty good in this, but Zero was better in all aspects of handling, pretty much except for top speed and guns. At the time, and even throughout most of the war, this plane had a varying number of armaments on it, but this model in particular had 650 caliber machine guns. At that time, a lot of planes in other Air Force's inventory, and even our own in the United States, our Army Air Corps, had 30 caliber machine guns on them. You see the Spitfires of the time had 8 30 caliber machine guns. A lot of other planes had a mix of 30 calibers and 50 calibers. This plane had 6 50 calibers all in the wings, which is phenomenal armament for the time, especially considering the Zero was not a defensive aircraft. It did not have armor on it. It's very thin-skinned. It did not have self-sealing fuel tanks. So if you got behind a Zero in one of these, if rounds got on target, they were going to tear that plane up. And even most of the other planes of the time, BF-109s and such, anything gets hit with 650 caliber machine guns, it's pretty much going to be a done deal. That plane's either going to catch fire or it's just going to suffer quite the damage to it. 50 caliber rounds are absolutely gigantic rounds, and they just tear things up when they're hit. We still use these machine guns that are in here. These are the M2 50 caliber machine guns, and it's still used by our military today. You see them on tanks, you see them on armored personnel carriers, they're on Humvees. So, very versatile machine gun. It's been in service for over 100 years. And at the time, like I said, this Hurricane we're fighting would be having at maximum maybe 2 20 millimeters and then the rest 30 cals. So the 50 cal was absolutely revolutionary. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.